So if we placed ourselves as children, really experiencing these kinds of things, and then how are those children now adults managing all of this real violence that they are participating in?
Well, look at the incidence of gun-related deaths.
Ah, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I mean, that has skyrocketed in this country.
mm-hmm. Well, that's what we needed to be able to try to make available is how that, unlike other kinds, of course, war
Mhm.
was something far away.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
what our young people experienced in our lifetime was something very, very close,
Yes.
very, very real. Um, now, speaking about the death thing, I remember that my parents had an old kind of encyclopedia of pictures of World War One. I mean, you're looking at real pictures taken of soldiers that were dead.
Right.
Yeah, see, that's as close as I've come in my early life of what that must be like to know that that's a real happening and the
And,
pictures are there.
for me, it was mostly Vietnam, and the incredible photography and stuff that came out of the Vietnam War. But I think we still distance ourselves from it. It just doesn't seem real. And it's over there.
It's over there.
It's over there. I mean, we haven't had a war in our country on our land since the Civil War. It's always somewhere else far away, you know?
Which gives attention to just what we're doing here. We're talking about something very, very visible, a very unusual experience of.
Welcome to the White House. This ceremony and the treaty we're signing today are both excellent examples of the rewards of patience. It was over 6 years ago, November 18th, 1981, that I first proposed what would come to be called the zero option. It was a simple proposal, one might say disarmingly simple. For the first time in history, the language of arms control was replaced by arms reduction. In this case, the complete elimination of an entire class of US and Soviet nuclear missiles. But the importance of this treaty transcends numbers. We have listened to the wisdom in an old Russian maxim, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is doверяй, no проверяй, trust but verify.
Назначение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
I like it.
Мне нравится.
They're not around anymore,
Yeah.
and the impact of that to their families. Boy,
You know, I saw on some program like 60 Minutes or something where they were talking about the soldiers today grew up with the video games of shooting and bombing and blowing up. And they're in their planes and they're looking at kind of like a radar screen of where to drop their bombs. And it's just like on the video games, and it doesn't seem real. And so it's almost like it's easier for them to carry out those missions because they're detached enough
yep.
from the reality.
So there's been a, a detachment, which means a concern. Our children are having to look at the death issue close to home,
Yeah.
especially schools,
No.
realizing that these kinds of things have happened, and there's been this issue now that has been lifted up even more because people are and parents are wanting to make schools safe.
And when you and I grew up, school was a safe place.
Yeah.
If your home wasn't safe, at least you were safe at school. And now there are kids who are afraid to go to school because they are afraid there's going to be a school shooting.
Mhm.
And I remember one time I was doing some therapy with a little kindergartner. I can't even remember what the issue was, why I was seeing him. But, my kids were coming from gang wars and very violent homes. And I said, we were doing some imagination play, and I said something about going to the living room window and looking out. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, "You don't go to the window and look out." And I said, "Really? Why don't you do that?" And he said, "Somebody's going to drive by and shoot you." And I thought,
Oh,
yeah, that's his reality, and it's real.
and see, you're talking about the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
Uh, so much change and everything, and so many experiences.
And now what must it be like? Because I retired in 2005.
Yeah.
So that's 20 years ago. I know it hasn't gotten better from the local news. It used to be Columbia. There was never a shooting. You could walk downtown at 2 a.m. and you'd be fine. And nobody locked their doors. Nobody locked their cars. Now, every night on the news, there are shootings and car thefts and, crime that we never, ever saw before.
Right.
So,
Well, we have taken on a number of events and happenings in our lifetime.
I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children, wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. Well, I don't suppose we can wait for some alien race to come down and threaten us, but I think that between us we can bring about that realization. In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
I want to be able to say to you, thank you,
oh,
Grandmother Sky, for doing this series, and how this series is one that I think has a purpose long beyond our lifetime, because there are those who are needing to hear a history that is not really very present. They hear bits and pieces, but they really need to be able to have some elderly people like us give attention to that. Well, I'll add an experience of, I think I was about a junior in college, and sometimes you look forward to being invited for a Sunday meal by somebody. And so I was invited and got on my motorcycle and went there, had a nice meal, but then I thought I better rest a little bit before I take off back on the motorcycle. And so I laid down and went to sleep. And then I woke up. Now I'm going to try and hold myself together on this. Someone had brought a baby and put it in my arms.
Oh,
And as I laid there, somehow I had some sense of what's this life going to be like in the future?
yeah.
Are they going to be able to be ready for a different kind of experience that, I have had? But we had no clue. I was just like 27 years old. We had no clue of what we've talked about in this series. And
Yeah.
I think about that experience of having some sense of if there's some way that I can give a simple prayer and a blessing for this little one. And that's what I did. I took a moment of silence and began to realize how that this child was going to have a different kind of experience than a lot of the generations before. Yeah.
I have had those same thoughts so many times when I've been with children. And gosh, what is your life going to be like? And I had that same feeling because you can't save them.
Mm.
You can't control anything in their lives. It's their path, it's their journey to take. But just sort of sending them off with a prayer and, a wish is all you can do. But it is amazing. And I'm sure you had the experience of 10, 15 years later, you see them on the news, usually not for a good thing.
Right.
You find out they're in prison or whatever. Yeah.
Well, my thank you and gratitude for you, Grandmother Sky, for the opportunity of just a little bit of maybe helpfulness with historical stuff.
Well, I'm ever grateful for the experience.
Yes, yes, yes.
Somebody wants to hear me talk.
Thank you, thank you. So we'll kind of call that good for this time. And
Oh, thank you for the opportunity because
wow.
Not many people want to hear our stories.
Well, we hope so.
I keep kind of trying to tell my kids that it's like, I'm not going to be here forever. What do you want to know? And I don't know if I told you this, but I got this box of their little cards, and they have really interesting questions. And it's supposed to be questions that your kids or grandkids can ask you. So I brought them with me at Christmas, and one night at dinner, I had everybody pick a card. Said, what has been your most interesting job?
Ooh.
Great question.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I think my most interesting jobs were the jobs that I had as a volunteer and before I, had a real job. And I told them all about working at St. Vincent's Orphanage in Chicago with newborn babies, because this was before the pill. So all these young girls would come to St. Vincent's and have their babies. And I got to bathe them and get them dressed and, feed them. And it was the most wonderful, loving job. And also get them ready for adoption. And carry this baby in to meet its new parents everybody cried, So that job was interesting. And then for several years, I worked in Operation Head Start its very first year. Mm-hmm. And I was on the south side of Chicago, and I was the only white person in the school. And just working as an aide. And I met the best people and had I learned so much, and had such great experiences. And then the next one was in Humboldt Park, which was all Puerto Rican. And so I got to experience that segment, of Chicago. And also in that job, it was all Latin King territory, Latin King gang.
Yeah.
Latin Kings are still quite active there. And then they were surrounded by the Black Panthers. And so there were often conflicts between the two. But what I learned about both of those gangs was they were there to protect their people. And their whole meaning for existence was to protect their people. And both of them, Black Panthers had the breakfast programs for children, and they both operated school supply things and stores, and they would give away school supply to kids. And it was a whole different story than you heard on the news, that people. So anyway, I told about all these jobs, and then there was a silence, and Noah said, "Well, I know I learned something." I learned something I didn't know. And it surprised me. I thought, you don't know about this about me? You never heard these stories? And he may have, but forgot too. I don't. But it was like, wow, I am really glad I did this. Yeah.
And I think that's something that is rather cosmic, is that those out there, in fact, it's the Dead Sea Scrolls, that even the angels in heaven can't wait to get here because this earth has a unique contribution to spirituality. This earth has a unique spiritual identity that the rest of the cosmos know. And they are concerned about how this earth is going to manage all of the different things that's happening here. And if you ask, well, do they have a right to come here? Probably because they are concerned about keeping Mother Earth in the picture.